A lot of thinking and a couple of drinks later, I'm finally gonna share some of my experiences. The area where I worked was incredibly isolated, surrounded by dense forest and rugged wilderness. I was a ranger up there. It was in the late 1990s. The rules and regulations can feel distant. You'll see what I mean by this later on. We drive around on an ATV, making sure the wildlife was safe and occasionally dealing with poachers. My job mainly involved ensuring the safety of the deer population and handling other wildlife management jobs. My only colleague was a guy that I'm gonna call Peter, short and easy to remember. Peter was your typical backwoods guy, a bit of a wild man who brewed his own moonshine and smoked like a chimney. He had been my best friend for several years and always had my back, no matter what we faced out there in the woods. The pay for the job wasn't great, but it came with perks that made it worth it. We had no boss breathing down our necks and we could basically go camping, get wasted, and call it a getaway. In the midst of everything, we were still able to arrest some people and put some real poachers behind bars. However, sometimes we got calls that made us actually do some work, hard work at that. If people spotted sick animals, it was up to us to go out there and make sure they didn't spread disease. If an animal showed aggressive behavior that might endanger locals, we had to make sure it was put down. We had friends at a local vet who would run blood samples if we suspected rabies or something similar. One day, Peter and I got a call from some pretty spooked locals. They told us that some boys had gone hunting a couple of days ago, but none of them had returned. They all believed the boys had been killed by bears or a wolf. Great, now we had to venture out in the wilderness to deal with potentially aggressive carnivores. The locals pointed us in the general direction, and we took off on our ATVs. We drove around the area for about 3 hours when we found an abandoned campsite. It was evident that the camp had been trashed by something, most likely a bear by the looks of it. The boys had left camp in a hurry, not even taking their rifles with them. From there, we went out on foot with our guns drawn, just in case. We found the first body a few meters away from the camp. He was lying on his stomach with several deep wounds in his back. What struck us as weird was that there were deep puncture wounds, which we had never seen before in a bear or a wolf attack. There was also a clear path, indicating where the other boys had fled. We found 2 more boys in the same small area, both lying dead with similar marks. One of them had been gutted. Peter was visibly shaken by the scene and just kept shaking his head in disbelief. According to the locals, there were supposed to be 4 boys out there, so we were still missing 1. We both nearly jumped out of our skins when we heard something rustling through the brush towards us. We aimed at the commotion and waited for it to reveal itself before we shot. I almost dropped my rifle when it came from the dense bushes. It was a red stag, with the mangled remains of the boy stuck in its antlers. The stag was struggling to keep its balance under the weight of the boy, but it was still aggressive towards us, as if it was about to charge at us. Peter was the first to snap out of the shock and started lighting the thing up. After further inspection, we noticed that its antlers were worn down and broken. It had put an excessive amount of force behind each of its charges, breaking its antlers on the poor boys. The reason the last boy was stuck in its antlers was because the damn thing had practically torn through his rib cage. We couldn't separate the boy from the antlers, so we had to bring the head of the deer with us. It was one of the most screwed up rides home, with several bodies tied to the back of our ATVs. Pretty disturbing, something I never thought I would be doing. The local police were pretty angry at us, seeing that we had moved bodies from a potential crime scene, but they let us off easy, since the killer was literally embedded in one of the victims. Seeing the heartbroken parents of those boys still haunts me to this day. That night, Peter and I hung out, mostly because I was still really spooked. Man, that stuff wasn't natural, he said at one point. Deer can be aggressive and defend themselves, but I know this one was hunting those boys, and it killed them all as well. They don't fucking do that. And that time was the first time I caught a glimpse of the spooky stuff that goes on out there. In the following years, I saw some deeply insane stuff that only Peter and I know about. I'm going to share some of these stories with you, and hopefully you will believe me and understand why I'm scared every time that I see a deer. About once or twice a month, we had to go on excursions into the wilderness to look for signs of poachers, sick animals, and other stuff like that. One time, we decided to drive out to a fairly secluded area because there were rumors of some potential poaching. It was a very long drive, so we always kind of put it off until the last minute, praying that the poachers would just get mauled by bears so we wouldn't have to make the long journey up there. Some of these places would take about 2, 3, or 4 hours to get there, and this time it took about 2 hours before the terrain became too difficult for even the ATVs to handle. We had to walk the rest of the way, which meant that we had to camp out overnight. Those are the free camping experiences that I told you about. Camping out was a norm for us, but we were further away from anything than I had ever been before, and the previous incident was still haunting my mind. Peter offered me some liquor to ease my worries, but there was no way that I wanted to be drinking, especially if we got attacked by some demonic deer again. The night went by without incident, but I still didn't get enough sleep. We continued our trek towards the supposed poacher hotspot. We arrived and looked around, but we found nothing. There didn't even seem to be any sign of human activity anywhere in the area. Fucking rumors, Peter said to himself as he shook his head in frustration. Normally, we would be happy to find nothing, but this time we were just exhausted and cranky. We were then startled by a loud echo through the forest. What the fuck was that? Peter pulled out his rifle and aimed where the noise was coming from. Even though it went against our instincts, we had to go investigate it. We got to a small ridge that overlooked the clearing. In the middle of the clearing, a group of 5 stags were huddled together, their heads down, as if they were grazing. We noticed that they all seemed to make sudden bite and jerking motions, like they were trying to gore the ground with their antlers. Peter fired a shot into the air to make them scatter, and they didn't move. If you have any basic knowledge of wildlife, you will know that any sudden loud noise will make just about any animal take off running. We fired a couple more shots into the air, but they just didn't react. Without thinking, we decided to calmly approach them to get a better look at what they were doing. As we got close, we were met with this nasty stench of rot. Is that a bear? Peter gestured to the ground in front of the stags. To our surprise, there was a large adult black bear. Its body was starting to decompose, which means that it was dead for about 4 or 5 days. The stags were making all sorts of noises and groaning as they continuously gored the carcass over and over again. They looked exhausted and malnourished. The bear's body was completely ripped apart except for its head, which they, for some reason, had left completely alone. We stood frozen to the ground as we watched this horrible scene unfold. How were they able to take down a bear? How is that even possible? I asked Peter. He just shook his head in disbelief as he raised his rifle and shot one of the stags. He later explained that he wanted a blood sample. As soon as the stag fell to the ground, all the others stopped what they were doing, and they just turned to look at us. They were covered in rotting blood and chunks of meat. They didn't show any aggressive behavior. They just stared at us, not flinching nor blinking. Peter changed his mind about the blood sample at this point and just slowly started backing away. I followed him and raised my rifle, just in case. We reached the ridge. They resumed their eating once again, not even paying attention to us. We were so done at this point that we didn't even set up camp that night. We just kept hiking at a brisk pace until we got to our ATVs. None of us said a word during the entire ride home, except for the occasional F word. That incident really did something to Peter. It did take him a couple of weeks before he went with me into the forest again. He was completely convinced that the stags were being manipulated by a witch or something, which I'm not really sure of. I don't really believe in witches and all that. I just believe that nature is a lot more screwed up than we realize. We've been away from untamed nature for so long, living in our towns and cities, that we forget how scary and unpredictable nature can be, especially when it comes to all sorts of animals living in the deep woods. But still, there was something just off about those stags, and I still don't have an explanation. One day, we got a call from the local police. An old man who lived by himself in a remote cabin hadn't been seen in a while. They wanted us to take them to the cabin since they weren't used to the terrain, being more accustomed to paved streets than the rough wilderness. We drove them out to the cabin and parked a few meters from the front door. It was pretty clear that something happened. The door was completely knocked off its hinges, and the cabin was empty. The officers then asked us to assist them in their search, and we agreed. The initial theory was that he had been taken by a bear, which seemed plausible considering the door's condition. We spread out and followed whatever trails we could find. It only took about half an hour before one of the officers called something in. He sounded a little shaken, but he gave us detailed directions to where he was. He didn't tell us what he had found. He just said, "You'll want to see this for yourselves." When we got to where he was, it was unclear what he had found since nothing looked out of place. No broken branches, no trail, nothing. He just pointed up to a long tree in front of him. Slung over one of the higher branches was a fresh deer carcass. Now this was weird, strange, but we didn't see what this had to do with the case. Then we noticed something even stranger further up the tree. There was a black bear carcass. Something had killed a bear and then placed it in the tree. I knew that leopards and other big cats did this later for consumption, but there were no big cats where this took place. The officers looked pretty uneasy, taking nervous glances over their shoulders. We stayed as a group after that. Obviously, we still searched for another couple of hours before we called it. On our way back, we once again passed the tree, and I kid you not, the deer was gone, leaving only some bloody branches behind. We picked up the pace and made our way back out of there without looking back, and, well, we never did find the body. There was a winter where we had a pretty horrible incident. The winters up here can be brutal, especially with heavy snow and temperatures dropping to the negatives. If someone goes missing, they're immediately presumed dead, because it's impossible to maintain your core temperature for long without proper gear. And when it's someone's kid who goes missing, it's even more heartbreaking. The police once again requested our assistance because a mother had reported her 6-year-old daughter missing. The thought of spending hours in the cold wasn't appealing, but we couldn't possibly turn a blind eye to a missing child. The mother had let her children play outside when one of them suddenly ran towards the tree line. They had been out there for some time, calling her name, but they just couldn't find her. That's when they called the police, which they ended up calling us. By the time we arrived at the area, she had been missing for about 2 hours. We followed a trail that we suspected were her tracks, which actually went far longer than what a kid should be able to run, at least at that age. But the strange thing is that the trail just stopped. There was no sidestepping, no scuffling, no signs of anything. It was like she just disappeared on the spot. We examined the tracks to see if she had backtracked or something, but there were no clear signs of any double prints. Peter was visibly upset and frustrated. We then asked the other kids why she started running into the forest, but they had no clear answer. They claimed that she just started running without any warning. The kids were shaking and crying, so we ended up asking the mother to return to their home while we kept looking. An officer followed them back to their house to make sure they felt safe. About 15 minutes later, one of the officers got a call on the radio. We could hear the sound of the mother crying in the background. They had found the girl. She was just sitting on the step of their back door. She was dead and frozen solid. She was only wearing a regular jacket and jeans. Considering that she was supposed to play outside for some time, the mother had locked the doors before they left because she didn't want anybody going inside, possibly to rob anything while they were away. To this day, I still tear up when I think about it. but I still have many unanswered questions about what happened. The obvious answer is that she went back home and then froze to death while she couldn't get inside. But I still think there's more to it. If she had ran back, how is it that none of her siblings or her mom noticed her? Why didn't she respond to their calls? How did she run back without leaving any tracks? How was she almost frozen solid even though she was only missing for 2 hours? Sorry, 4 hours. None of the neighbors saw anything strange, so there was nothing to investigate. The mom, unfortunately, blamed herself and became an alcoholic. I still think about the incident every day, and for some reason, it just hit harder than the 4 boys who had been mauled to death. You know, the more I think about it, the stranger deer seem to get. They seem peaceful, very gentle, that we often see grazing in meadows or going across the road. But after some of the encounters I have experienced, I don't look at deer the same way anymore. There's just something about them, something that makes me wonder if what we see on the surface is all there is. Maybe they're not what they seem to be. Maybe there's something lurking beneath those eyes, something that we can't quite understand. Or maybe there's something else out there in the forest, something that uses these creatures as a disguise. Or worse, something that twists them into something unrecognizable and terrifying. I've seen and heard enough to believe that deer are far from the simple animals we think they are. And while these thoughts might make you second guess that peaceful stroll through the woods, I'm not done yet. I got more stories to share about when I was a park ranger. Stories that might just make you rethink what you know about these things, these deer. So I once saw a deer mother bite one of her fawns by the head and then start shaking it violently until its neck snapped. She then dropped it to the ground and nudged it a couple of times as if she didn't quite understand what she had just done. I didn't continue looking because I was a bit freaked out. One time, I found a dead deer lying next to a tree. The markings on the tree and the markings on the deer's head suggested that it rammed its head into the tree's trunk until it died. So I ended up taking a blood sample, and when I analyzed it, it was completely healthy. One time in the winter, I stumbled upon a fresh kill. It was a deer with half its face missing. Its neck was all jacked up, and it had a huge hole where the guts were hanging out. As I was starting to poke the wound to check the temperature, the thing let out a yelp and rose to its feet. In complete disbelief as this bloody mess turned its head to look at me and started walking away calmly. It then dropped dead about 10 meters and didn't get back up after that. It can be pretty exhausting to remember these memories all the time, but I have another story for you. I've been seeing a girl for a couple of weeks. For some reason, she found my job to be hot and thought that I was some sort of macho dude. I went along with it because she was also cute. She also hooked up Peter and co-worker with one of her friends. She lived in one of the fancier houses in town with a nice view of the forest from her living room. We decided to have a double date at her house where we would watch a movie and eat dinner. Peter and I hadn't been into the forest that entire month. We had just gotten caught up in our own personal lives as well. Honestly, it felt nice to get a break from work, seeing as how we weren't exactly ever off duty. We fell asleep on the couch in the living room. At some point during the night, I woke up. It was a beautiful night, so I walked up to the glass door in order to get a better view of the sky. After a few minutes, I spotted something in the distance. The faint glow of eye shine from something staring intensely back at me. I froze in place and observed this unknown creature as it slowly started walking towards me. When it got within the light that was coming from the house, it revealed itself to be a medium-sized red stag. It just kept walking towards me, didn't blink, or take its eyes off of me. It walked directly into the glass, which actually seemed to puzzle it a bit. It then started nudging the glass, which turned into violent pushing. At this point, I started backing away, still in complete disbelief about what was happening in front of me. My girlfriend wakes up due to the loud banging on the glass. "What the fuck is going on?" she asked, still half asleep. Before I could answer her, the stag started letting out these guttural screams. As it also intensified its ramming, it broke through the glass. My girlfriend screamed, and Peter came running down the stairs to see what was going on. The stag just calmly walked up to me like it hadn't just broken through a glass door, keeping those horrible noises going as it approached me. I tried backing up but stepped in some glass and fell over. The stag just continued looking at me with unflinching eyes as it continued letting out those guttural screams. My girlfriend was still screaming also at this point. The sound of Peter unloading his small sidearm. He hit the stag a few times but mainly missed, leading to a lot of property damage. The stag fell on the floor. And to this day, I'm still grateful to Peter for bringing his gun. The girlfriend and I broke up the next day. She said that I was either cursed or unlucky. Either way, she didn't want anything to do with me. I still always sleep with my blinds on. I never want to see another window in the night, especially when I know what might be on the other side of that glass. I may have ignored the forest, but I know it didn't ignore me. I once found myself lost with Peter in a snowstorm. We were basically as lost as we could be, with no shelter or any way to start a fire. Snow was falling so densely that we couldn't even see more than 5 meters in front of us. The wind was so cold that my lips started bleeding. We drove around for what felt like an eternity until we came up on this old hunting cabin. We had such a hard time getting off our ATVs because our clothes had frozen solid just on our backs. I still remember how Peter was shaking and clacking his teeth. The cabin was completely empty, but had a simple fireplace and some dry wood. As we sat there, still warming up by the fire, we had a moment of dread when we realized that we might actually die here. We had no idea how long the storm would last, and there wasn't a whole lot of wood for us to burn. Peter then rose to his feet and said, "Fuck it, wait for me here." He went outside and returned a few minutes later with an axe. For a brief second, I really did wonder if he was going to put me out of my misery. To my relief, he started beating the ever-loving out of the floor. We ended up using the boards as firewood, which kept the fire going for a bit longer. Bless you, Peter, and your smart brain. In the end, we most likely burned about half the cabin's floor, which revealed more and more of the cold dirt underneath. And of course, there happened to be the remains of a couple of people down there who were also waiting out the storm stuck in this murder cabin. The remains looked very old. We seriously debated if we should leave or stay, but we chose to stay because we would have a better chance of surviving against a psycho killer than the actual storm. At one point, we heard someone approaching the cabin, only to run away into the wilderness. It makes no sense because only a mentally deranged person would have the balls to wander around there at that time. Then again, we were in a cabin with dead bodies underneath the floorboards. We sat with our rifles ready, just in case. After a long time, the storm started winding down. We came out from the cabin, dug out our ATVs out of the snow, and made our way back into town. Navigating was a lot easier now that we could actually see where we were going. We immediately went to the police station after this. They were surprised to see us since they had already reported us missing or dead. We told them about the cabin and agreed to show them the next day. I slept for about 14 hours after soaking in a tub of hot water. The best sleep I ever had in my life. We met up with the officers and took them through the forest to the cabin. It was gone. There was no trace to be found. The trails left behind by the ATVs were still very clearly there, even the spot where we dug them out, but the cabin itself just wasn't there. There was a clear area where it was, but there was nothing but a fresh layer of snow. The officers looked irritated and said that we were wasting their time. They said that we must have been hallucinating, that we drank too much of Peter's home brew. It still makes no sense to me, and we never found an explanation for that. In early fall, Peter and I came across a hunter who was panicking. He begged us to help his friend who had been attacked by a bear further up the trail. He drove with us up to the incident where it occurred, but it was already too late. His friend was all messed up beyond belief. His face was ripped off, he was gutted, and his limbs were all twisted in unnatural positions. I almost threw up on the spot. We decided that this bear was too dangerous to be left alive, since it was roaming fairly close to town. We started looking for tracks to get an idea of where it was going. The hunter was just sitting up against a tree, too shocked to react to what was actually going on. We kept describing the creature as a bear when we asked them. But here's the crazy thing. We only found deer tracks at the scene. Against our better judgment, we started tracking them. I swear there was a constant stream of cold sweat running down my back while we were busy hunting this. I would honestly have been rather be tracking a bear at this point. We got to a clearing at some point when we found a piece of the guy's face hanging from a bush. Freaked out, we had to continue on, and finally we caught sight of it. It was wandering around in circles, almost like its internal compass was messed up. This time, I was the one who shot it, and I couldn't let Peter have all the fun. I hit it right in the head. Instant death. Chunks of flesh were still hanging from its antlers. We had to actually collect the individual pieces and put them in a plastic bag so that we could deliver them to the morgue with the rest of the body. Of course, we gagged as we did it. It was one of the most horrible things to do. We ended up driving the hunter back with us so he could deliver his testimony. "Why did you tell us it was a bear?" Peter asked him. "You would have never believed me," he answered. "If only you knew." Peter and I were hanging outside his apartment one night, sharing stories and drinking. We sat down on a small balcony and smoked when we got a call from the police station. There had been some strange sightings of an animal, most likely a bear, roaming the area. Some of the locals were pretty scared and had reported it to the police. Of course, it fell under our jurisdiction, so we decided that we would just check it in the morning. We didn't feel like chasing some large creature while half drunk, and the sun had just gone down. We sat for a few more minutes, just talking, when a screech echoed from beyond the tree line. We were silent for a couple of minutes. "Fuck, that was loud," Peter said, and so we decided to go check it out. Operation Half Drunk Hunting commenced. We wandered around aimlessly, randomly pointing our flashlights and rifles right in the dark. "You gotta be fucking kidding me," Peter shouted. He had found another set of footprints of a deer. "Don't tell me this is another fucking deer. I swear." He sounded both angry and scared. We then hear rustling behind us, and we both turned and aimed at the sound. Two glowing eyes reflected our flashlights. It let out a loud squeal and charged at us. We both ended up shooting it. It was a boar. It was so big that we initially thought it was a bear. "At least it wasn't a fucking deer," I said. Peter let out a nervous laugh and shook his head in front of this huge animal that was before us. Honestly, we didn't know what to do with it. We hadn't brought our ATVs and the thing was too heavy to carry, so we decided to just leave it there. The wolves can scavenge it. The police actually believed us this time. Some of the hogs out there can grow to enormous sizes. Great. Fucking great. Most people don't know this, but there's a bunch of unmapped, unexplored cave systems all around Russia. There is also the case from where I lived. It wasn't uncommon for Peter and I to stumble upon a cave or two while we were going around. Lots of local legends surround the caves, like an underground city of people, witches, prehistoric animals, and so on. Whatever the case, I always found cave systems to be fascinating. It's like entering a new place where the same rules don't really apply. So when the police managed a rescue team to help a teenager who had gotten trapped in one of the caves, I didn't hesitate to volunteer. At this point, Peter and I were liked enough by the police that they kind of trusted us and included us in some of their work. Peter didn't come along this time because he was too hungover. As the case stood, two teenage boys tried to explore a local cave system that had some very steep drop-offs. One of the boys had lost his footing and tumbled into the darkness. He was alive, but had broken his ankle and couldn't get out. Instead of getting stuck himself, his friend had just chosen to send for help. I made my way through the cave, making sure to watch my step. The cave floor was very damp and covered with something, so it wasn't that much of a surprise that the boy had slipped. When we came to the drop-off, we shone a light on him. He waved and smiled knowing he was saved. I started descending the steep rock wall with a rope tied around my waist. When I got to the bottom, I secured the boy to the rope and gave the officers the signal to start pulling him up. He went that way, the boy said to me and pointed in a narrow passageway at the back of the cave. What do you mean? I asked, wondering if he had hit his head on the way down. My friend, he came back for me and he told me that he found an exit that way. I was confused, but I told him, your friend is up there with the others. His face went completely pale on the spot. But he was down here with me. He went that way. An uneasy feeling hit me, which I tried to ignore, especially because I was now the one stuck at the bottom. Well, that was until they threw down the rope again, and this kid was claiming that somebody was down here with him. For those few minutes I felt very exposed, and kept focusing on the narrow passage at the back of the cave. I pointed my flashlight to the ground and found some fucking footprints leading to the passage. Just very bare feet. I started panicking, but that's when they threw down the end of the rope and hit me right on the shoulder. I let out a scream because that's how scared I was. As they pulled me up, I refused to look back down. I got the fuck out of there as soon as possible. Whatever was down there, I didn't want to know. One of our biggest problems with poachers was that they would sometimes leave behind these heavy-duty rusty bear traps. Sometimes they never came back for them, which means that some parts of the forest could potentially be a minefield for some broken ankles. Sometimes we would find rotting carcasses that had become trapped in one and left to die. One time I almost stepped in one, but Peter noticed the chain in time to stop me. Thanks again, friend. We came across one of these traps, which had been sprung. Left in the trap was a boot with the foot still attached. The rest of the body was gone. A large pool of blood was left behind with bloody pieces of fabric. From what we could tell, it looked like someone had gotten stuck and then had his foot amputated. We followed the bloody trail but found nobody. He must have been with a friend who drove him out of there. The strange thing is that bear traps are fairly easy to break out if you know which of the pins to pull. The poor guy lost his foot because of some dumbass poacher. We ended up taking the foot with us and asked around the police station. They hadn't received any reports or incidents about a bear trap. There were also no records in the hospital. I assumed the guy didn't even go. This man must have been a poacher himself, or just one tough son of a you know what. We never did find him, or hear anything about somebody missing a foot. Still, finding a foot in the forest is never nice, especially when you know the type of stuff that's out here. Peter once showed me an abandoned settlement that he found back in the day. I was more of a city boy than him. He had always lived in the less populated areas, and he spent a lot of his younger years as a kid and teenager exploring the forest. He barely talked about these times because of his alcoholic father, who would beat him, and his mom, but he trusted me and sometimes opened up after a bottle or two. To him, exploring the wilderness was a way to escape from his home, which makes sense as to why he had a pretty good internal map of the place. We drove for a couple of hours until we arrived at the settlement. It looked all rotten and old as hell. Most of the buildings were made of wood and looked ready to collapse at any second. Some of this was your typical Soviet concrete that looked about as stable as our economy. Still, we chose to explore a bit, just in case. After all, this place would have been an amazing base for poachers. The houses were empty except for some damn furniture and a couple of stoves. The concrete structures, on the other hand, still had some interesting stuff lying around. We found some wet boxes of old dynamite, which led us to believe that this was an old mining town. Sure enough, there was a large quarry a few kilometers away. A lot of stuff that we found was too rusted to make out what it once was. Everything else was just in a state of decay that made it seem pretty unsafe for us to fool around with. It's not uncommon to find old abandoned mining towns that were never put on the map, so it didn't really take a second to wonder why they had been abandoned. That is, until we spotted the damn deer. Peter tugged on my shoulder and gestured to the right of us. There was a large stag watching us from behind one of the houses. The more we looked around, the more deer we noticed. There were about 10 or 12 of them just observing us. They didn't seem scared, but instead like they were making sure that we were on our way out of there. We slowly approached our ATVs as we noticed that they were following us, never blinking or making a sound. When we got to our ATVs, we debated whether or not we should just light them up, but we decided against it because we didn't want to hurt a bloodthirsty demon deer charging at us. We just started driving away, counting ourselves lucky, seeing as how they hadn't decided to fuck us up. I remember looking back once we were about 100 meters or so, and seeing well over 20 deer standing there motionless as we raced out of the area and back to town. I never went back, but we often talked about it. He firmly believed that the deer had something to do with the settlement being abandoned. I'm not so sure about that, but I definitely don't think it's out of the question. I swear, these deer and their mysterious ways. At this point, the police knew of our various encounters, but they didn't really believe us. They still had enough respect for us not to mock us. After all, we had retrieved quite a few bodies for them. That all changed when one of the officers, one of my friends, went missing. He hadn't responded to a call about some kids that claimed to have been stalked by an old man while they were playing in the forest. For some reason, he had gone out there alone to investigate. That was 16 hours ago, and nobody's heard from him since. Peter and I helped with the search since we both knew him quite well. We went searching for hours, but we didn't find anything. Then, someone found his handgun lying on the ground. It was fired twice, but we couldn't find the bullet casings. One of the officers had brought a dog. They took a few whiffs of the gun and started darting off into the woods, obviously tracing something. We followed as best as we could, but the damn thing was fast as hell. Suddenly, the woods were filled with the sound of aggressive barking and whining. We arrived at the spot where the dog had gone and found a big surprise, a big fucking deer. From one of its antlers hung the lifeless body of the officer. The deer had impaled him through his throat and out the mouth. It was so grotesque that I still get a lump in my throat when I think about it. It was my friend, and that fucking deer had killed him. It stood completely still, its head weighed down by the officer. The dog whimpered and started growling, but it didn't move an inch closer. One of the officers started shooting at it, which caused all of us just to light it up. Retrieving his body still stands clear in my mind as one of the hardest things I ever had to do. After that incident, the officers always took our claims serious. They even offered backup when we would go out. I still wonder about the original request though, about the old man. Was the story just made up? Did the kids just imagine him? Peter insisted that something supernatural was manipulating the deer, making them aggressive and batshit insane. I still lean more towards the theory that deer, just by their very nature, are batshit insane. We were checking out a potential poaching camp. When we arrived, we were greeted by two older men, who immediately started questioning us. We explained the situation to them, and we asked them to step outside so we could inspect their camp. It was a pretty standard camp with some fresh kills and pelts, but the men seemed really nervous anyway, like they were hiding something. We started asking questions until they cracked. They admitted that they had just shot and killed about 7 or 8 deer the previous night, but they hadn't retrieved a single one of the carcasses. They had simply fled the area. What kind of hunter kills animals just to let them rot? Why the fuck did you do it? Peter asked them with a sense of urgency in his voice. They explained that they had been sitting in the deer blind, waiting to take a decent shot at some unlucky deer. That's when they spotted one that was walking straight towards them, and when they aimed at it, they saw its eyes through their scope. It was just looking directly at them, but still walking calmly towards them. That's when they heard a twig snap and realized that their blind was being surrounded. All of them had the same lifeless look in their eyes. None of them made a noise or any sudden movements. And when they had just completely surrounded the blind, they started putting some aggressive expressions and began making noises at the hunters. Their blind was raised about 3 meters off the ground and supported by 4 wooden pillars. That's when the deer started ramming the supports while they were still screaming, shrieking, or whatever noise they were making. The hunters were scared, and they just started shooting the deer one by one. They ran back to camp, and they hadn't even been out hunting since then. They showed us the way to their blind, and sure enough, there were several deer carcasses lying at the base of it. There were visible markings on the supports, which actually backed up their claim. They asked us if they were going to get in trouble for what they had done. We told them no, as long as they didn't do anything with the carcasses, we wouldn't press charges. Normally, we would have made them pay a fee, but seeing that they had been through the same encounters with these demonic deer, we didn't make them pay a fee. In fact, we thanked them for taking care of them since they were a threat to the locals. We told them that if they ever encounter aggressive deer like that, they should put them down immediately. They looked a bit puzzled as we drove away, and we never saw them again. It all started when Peter got a terrible idea. He suggested that we find a central point in the forest, maybe by a lake or something, anywhere that deer were known to go, and then set up a blind in one of the biggest trees and camp out for a week or so, shooting any deer that seemed off. At first, I just called them a dumbass, seeing as our job was to preserve the wildlife rather than kill it. To be honest, I was also terrified of spending a whole week in the middle of nowhere. He called me a coward and told me that he was either going to go with me or without me. Of course, I wasn't going to let my best friend go through all that by himself for a whole week. He most likely knew that and used that as bait. We drove to the local hardware store and picked up the necessary equipment for our little project. Screws, wooden planks, ropes, and other things. I went shopping for other supplies such as canned food and water. We loaded up the ATVs with all of our gear and set off into the wilderness. I did wonder why Peter out of nowhere just wanted to do something so rash and stupid, but I figured that he was just fed up and tired of everything. I didn't really blame him, to be honest. But here's the weird thing. We actually hadn't experienced anything unnatural for almost half a year up to this point. Part of me wondered if he actually wanted to seek it out for some reason. He never told me why he decided to lead this dumb crusade against the deer, but I still ended up going with him so that I could watch his back. We eventually found a pretty big lake surrounded by big beautiful trees. It was early August, so there wasn't any danger to freeze to death while we slept. Anyways, we started building our blind, which ended up being more of a wooden platform, about 5 or 6 meters above the ground with a great view of the lake. By the time we were done, the sun was setting, and we had seen no sign of wildlife the entire time we were building our blind, but I figured it was just because of the amount of noise that we were making. Our plan had one huge flaw that we had forgotten to realize: the damn mosquitoes. We had no cover and were placed right next to the mosquito capital of this nation. We caught no sign of anything strange the first night, except each other's swollen faces. At dawn the next day, we awoke to the sound of something splashing around in the water. We peeked over to the edge of our blind and saw a doe along with her 2 fawns. We looked at them for about 15 minutes before we figured that they were pretty normal. Similar incidents happen every once in a while the first few days, but there was nothing else off. I felt relieved and wondered if they had migrated to some new place, planning on scaring some new rangers, but for some reason, Peter seemed extremely tense and would curse under his breath. "Peter, what's going on, man?" I asked. He looked at me with a hollow expression and sat up beside me. He explained that he had been having nightmares about the deer. He felt that if he killed some of them, he could prove to himself that he had nothing to fear. The poor guy hadn't had a decent night's sleep in well over a month at that point. He almost started crying while he told me these things, which really showed me how close this guy was to the edge. I had to help him, so I stayed with him and kept a lookout while he took a nap. I hadn't told him anything, but I actually been looking into how much it would cost to move away from this place. I hadn't said anything because I wasn't really planning on anything. Besides, I didn't feel like I could just leave him behind. I kept an eye on our surroundings for several hours and almost decided to just lay back and enjoy the view of the lake. But then, I heard something approaching to our left. Out of the tree line stepped the lone stag. I waited a bit to see if it would behave strange before I woke Peter up. It started bobbing its head in motion as if it was drinking from the lake, even though it wasn't anywhere near the lake. Well, that was more than enough proof for me, so I slowly shook Peter until he woke up. He instantly crawled over to the edge and looked at the deer, grinning with some kind of sadistic satisfaction. That's when he took aim at it with his rifle and fired at it. He let out a sigh of relief and started laughing. We heard the sound of several animals walking around within the tree line, but never saw any of them. It almost sounded like that stag had been bait to see how we would react. This only made Peter more paranoid. He was practically trembling with fear every time that we heard something wandering around in the tree line. Sometimes the deer would appear on the far side of the lake, but no matter how many times Peter and I shot at them, we never hit them. At night, our main source of light was a lantern that ran on petroleum. Part of me always suspected that this was a horrible idea, to use in a blind made of dry wood. On our 5th night into this crusade, things hit the fan, if you know what I mean. We kept spotting the eye shine of several animals, but every time we looked through the scopes, there was nothing. It almost felt like they were playing with us. Peter started firing shots into the air, trying to throw off the creepy efforts from whatever they were doing, but of course, it didn't work. I picked up the lantern and raised it higher in order to illuminate the ground better. When I stood up, I got lightheaded and fell over. I dropped the lantern, which in turn, as you guessed it, started a whole damn inferno. We abandoned everything and just descended down the rope. My rifle was up there along with all of my favorite gear. As we stood there in the night, the blazing blind illuminated a lot more than the lantern had. I still shudder at the thought. The largest flock of deer I had ever seen was standing in the tree line. All of their eyes lit up from the flames, giving them a hellish appearance. Peter was practically hyperventilating at this point, and we made a dash towards our ATVs. We hit the ignition and got the fuck out of there. We never did look back to see if they were following us or anything. The entire ride back, we just kept driving and letting out cries of adrenaline mixed with actual fear. When we got back, Peter just went home without saying anything. I went to my apartment and completely shut myself off from the rest of the world. I locked my door, closed the blinds, and turned off my shitty phone. I stayed that way for a couple of days. Then, I got the feeling to go grab a drink. I had already consumed every bottle of alcohol in my apartment, so I went to the bar that was located on my street. When I entered, I was met with worried looks from the people who knew me. "How you holding up?" the bartender asked me. This surprised me because none of them would have known about the stuff Peter and I went through the past week. "Well, could have been better," I replied. "Well, after Peter's accident, he just kind of disappeared for a while." "Peter's accident? What happened?" My expression made the situation pretty clear. "Fuck, I thought you knew," and he filled me in. Peter had packed his bags and rented some rundown car with the intention of skipping town. He then took off intoxicated and hit a tree at going about 80 miles. The car was totaled, and Peter died on the spot. After a few minutes of silence, I remember standing up and just walking out of there. I walked around aimlessly for hours, trying to make sense of what happened. Eventually, I found myself back in my apartment complex. I noticed a piece of paper hanging on my mailbox. I began to tear up when I read, "My dear friend, I have decided to leave this place. I can no longer bear the shadow that looms over us, and I hope you will come visit me someday. You helped me through some bad times, but this time you can't help me. If you decide to come over, you can find me at the address was blacked out." I cried for so long that it seemed like an eternity. I still tear up as I'm typing this. After about a month or so, I decided to move out of Russia and get a new start. I know I can never escape my past or the nightmares that keep resurfacing, but I have put a great distance between then and now. I still miss that crazy bastard every day, and I will never forget how much of an amazing friend he was. I now live in the safety of the heart of a big city, far away from any forest. I sometimes go on drives through some of the more scenic woods, but it feels so fake. The European forest doesn't have the same raw feeling as the Russian forest. I sometimes miss my old home. I just wish there wasn't an abundance of terrifying animals roaming the woods. I haven't experienced anything unnatural since I moved, and I have finally learned to sleep at night. I do speak with a therapist about some of the experiences I had, and I feel more in control of my fears now. Well, that's it. Believe it if you will. Either way, this is very real to me. Next time you get a chance, raise a glass to my best friend Peter in honor of his memory and the man that he was. I would like to share my experience with you. At first I thought about asking for it to be anonymous, but the truth is that the few people who matter to me and who will recognize this already know about it. I am a real estate agent. Some time ago, when I changed companies, I was lucky to be assigned one of the most important properties we had for sale. Actually, maybe not lucky, as you will judge. We had many expensive homes, but also simple ones. Among these properties was a very well-equipped cabin that used to belong to a famous singer. It even had a small recording studio. It was a small but very high-end cabin, and the path around it had been built very carefully. Despite everything, it seemed to be in the middle of nowhere. You had to search for it very specifically to be able to get there. At times, the road seemed to end, and also any navigation app couldn't lead you to it. It was surrounded only by mountains, and the nearest town was a few hours away by car. It was a real beauty. It was in the Sierra Madre Occidental in Mexico. From what I heard about what people say in the States, this is similar to the Appalachian Trail, a mountain region that runs through different states in Mexico. It had been in the company's portfolio before I even got there. For several years, the owner had been indecisive and asked not to show it, but finally, it coincided with the day that I started, that he finally made up his mind to sell it. It was going to be difficult to sell. The price wasn't low, and it was hard to get to the cabin. It was for a very specific type of person who had sufficient resources and who was extremely protective of their privacy. When I went to go see it for the first time, I had to be joined by another colleague from the firm. There was no way I could have found it on my own. From that exact time, the feeling of being there in the middle of nowhere was overwhelming. It was just the two of us. There's a sense of desolation that I suppose can be stimulating for some type of people. But to me, it was terrifying. And my colleague felt the same way too. He told me he was grateful that it was now my turn to handle that sale. It was going to be a great commission, but he found no joy in having to go there, especially because he emphasized that he had no intention of going back alone. We reviewed what needed to be renovated and left. My colleague insisted we do it before nightfall. There are some parts where it seems the road disappears at night, and it's terrible. Let's finish as soon as we can, he told me. I noted everything that needed fixing and contacted a contractor who told me it could be done in 2 days of work. I wasn't going to travel there 2 days in a row, so I chose to stay in that house, get ahead on some other work, and supervise that all the repairs were done in the best way possible. Staying there alone was the worst thing that I have ever done. That night, I experienced the most scariest event of my life. I traveled there in a caravan with the 2 trucks of the workers and the contractor. Even though I had warned them, they were surprised by how remote the location was. They actually worked very quickly, in a hurry, but I took that as a good thing. It seemed like they wanted to finish everything in 1 day, but they were running out of time. I warned them what my colleague had told me, that the road gets very complicated at nightfall, so shortly before 7, they started their journey back. I got stuff ready for dinner, and at a certain point, I even began to enjoy that solitude, everything being quiet. I imagined living in a place like that, at least for seasons, writing or doing something similar. Maybe that's why the singer who had built it was attracted to it. I sat at the table on the white wooden porch. That's when I realized there were no insects. I also noticed that there were no sounds of crickets, no animal noises. I tried to remember if I had seen any animals, but not even a squirrel the whole entire journey from the main road to the hour-and-a-half dirt road to get there. It was at that moment when I thought I saw something. At first, I thought I was being paranoid. You know, those situations that makes you see things when they're not really there. Well, that was the case. I thought I saw a woman's face, completely white, among the branches of some trees, as if there was somebody just standing there, just showing their face. I stood up. I took a few steps towards what I saw, and it didn't move, and I rushed back inside the cabin. I locked the door and I looked out the window, and there was nothing there. After a few minutes, I told myself I was just seeing things, so I decided to go back to work in the studio. The silence in the studio was overwhelming. I felt like I could hear my own heartbeat. I dedicated myself to writing on my computer for a while, until I noticed the light starting to flicker. That's when I realized I hadn't checked the gas in the generator, and I had been using it a lot during that workday. I opened the door, and as soon as I did, I thought I heard some laughing in the distance. My first reaction was to think that the workers had returned, but that didn't make sense. By then, they should have been arriving in town. The same sound happened again, catching my attention this time. I went outside to the porch again. It could have been a bird, maybe making a sound that I could have confused with laughing, but there was no other noise, and it was a strange hour for a bird that wasn't nocturnal to be around. I realized it was coming from the same direction where I thought I had seen that face a few hours before. I checked my phone, only to remember that there was no signal in that place at all. A few kilometers away, about 20 minutes, there was signal at times. I remember because I had stopped with a colleague to send a message the first time we went to the place. For a moment, I didn't know what to do. Should I go to town or back home? Was I really going to drive back 4 hours just to return and make it back by morning? I went back into the cabin and started feeling very anxious. My chest started to hurt. I had no idea what was outside, and even though all logic told me it was just an animal, I couldn't contain my nerves. Without thinking any further, I grabbed my keys and ran to my car. I started driving down the path that seemed denser. I drove and drove until the sound of notifications on my phone started to alert me that there was a bit of signal. It was minimal, but it was something. I opened my messaging app and talked with some of the workers. They told me that they confirmed that they had arrived safely and would see me in the morning. I talked a bit with my boss and my girlfriend, and finally, I was able to calm down. It was time to return to the cabin. It was evident to me that my nerves, the solitude, and all the silence had played tricks on me. That's why nobody else wanted to take the task of selling this, despite the juicy commission. It was difficult. but it was my chance to prove that I could do it. I ended up turning the vehicle around. I had barely advanced a few hundred meters back when I realized I had made a mistake at some point. I couldn't see the road ahead. There was nothing but trees. I had to get out, walk back a few steps, and try to figure everything out. If it weren't for the car lights, it would be pitch black out here. I did find a path about 50 meters back at an almost impossible curve. In fact, there were many entrances that seemed like new roads, but they led nowhere. At least at night they seemed like entrances. I figured that most likely from above, this whole area must look like a maze. I imagined it would look amazing if I asked those who would film the cabin to also take some drone shots of the area. I did calm down, but when I arrived back at the cabin, I noticed that the door was open and the lights were off. None of these things were the way that I had left them. I went in to check and saw that everything seemed normal, or so it appeared. I checked everywhere, but there was no one there. Then, I checked the generator, and it was out of gas. It was possible that I simply didn't close the door, and that maybe the air had swung it open. The lights had most likely gone out because the generator had run out of fuel. I began to convince myself that being full of anxiety and being nervous had everything to do with it. I kept telling myself that it was all just my imagination, that I was alone in a cabin in the woods, far from everything. That was all, and I kept repeating it to myself. I was in the back looking for the gas tank for the generator when I heard something else. The sound of footsteps, as if someone was walking inside the cabin. I rolled my eyes and pinched myself, as they say, to know that I wasn't dreaming and that I wasn't imagining anything. It was real. Someone was walking inside. I walked slowly towards the side. If someone was inside, I didn't want them to see me through the windows. In the distance, at the front, I saw my car just as I had left it, with the door open. I crouched and approached, but I heard the footsteps inside also heading towards the door. I heard them open it, and then I heard someone walking towards the car. From my spot, I couldn't see who it was, but we were less than 3 meters apart. The footsteps descended from the porch to the gravel floor. Not knowing if they would walk towards the side where I was, I dropped to the ground and rolled under the cabin's floor. The space underneath was enough to hide me. I couldn't see, but I could hear the sound of steps going around the cabin onto the gravel path. After some time of listening to them, I focused on making as little noise as possible. I was very tired. It must have lasted about half an hour until I was sure that no one was close. Then, I decided to come out. I approached and closed my car, making sure everything was still there. I went into the house and secured the doors and windows. Everything seemed fine. I did try to stay awake. The plan was to sleep until the workers arrived the next day. They said they were going to arrive here very early, and everything would be fine. I kept repeating to myself that everything was going to be okay. However, around 3 a.m., I was dying of sleep. My eyes were closing. I thought maybe I could sleep in the locked studio, and nothing would happen. It had been hours since I heard or saw anything strange. I looked for some water, a blanket, and a pillow, and then, that's when I heard a noise. The glass of water fell from my hand. The car alarm had gone off. My instincts kicked in and made me run to the window. And there, illuminated by the flashing lights of the car, I saw somebody running towards the trees. It was a woman wearing some kind of tunic, but something was very strange. Her legs, they were bent backwards, like a dog's legs. It almost seemed like she was running backwards, but it couldn't be. Imagine somebody running towards the trees with their legs backwards. Seeing this almost made me pass out. I let the alarm continue until it turned off on its own. Then I went to the side of the door. I couldn't stop thinking about what I had seen, and I couldn't stop shaking. I'm not sure what happened, but I guess I fell asleep right there by the door. The first rays of sunlight came at a distant sound. An engine, the sound of an old car making a lot of noise. I could hear it from afar because the mountains carried the echo for miles. One of the workers from the previous day arrived, joined by some of the locals from the neighboring village, who had come to help finish the work in one day. One of them noticed my dark circles and told me that as long as I stayed out here alone, I would continue not sleeping. At that moment, I couldn't ask him more because he started working. However, at lunchtime, I found out that the 3 people from the village were somewhat surprised that I had stayed alone. I'm not sure why, but I ended up telling them what I had seen. Normally, in any other moment of my life, I would have felt embarrassed to share what happened to me, but at that moment I couldn't hold it in. One of them even nodded as if he understood me. When I described what I saw near the car, they confirmed that I had encountered something evil. However, what they told me next almost made me leave the entire country. They said that this wouldn't be the only thing that I would come across. While we were talking more, I realized something. Whatever it was, had to have approached the car to set off the alarm. And this car, like all company cars, had a front and rear camera recording with motion detection. I couldn't wait to return to the city that same afternoon and review the recording, hoping to see whatever it was, to find out if it was real. It's very strange to confront things you can't explain. Something that shows you that there's a whole world of unexplained things out there. That terrible night in the cabin, the night that I believe I saw things that were not natural. We finished working around 5 p.m. and set out on the way back to the city. All the workers from the village seemed to be nervous about being there all day. I don't know what happened as the hours passed, but later, it was a feeling that was also seen among everybody, even those who came from the city and didn't know any of the stories surrounding that area, those mountains. Nothing happened for the rest of the day, and we headed out of this creepy-ass place. We stopped in the village on our way back and invited everyone to eat because no one had done so until then. The local guys ate with us before heading back to their home. I was very lucky to get their contacts because hours later, when I got to the office, I received a text message from the contractor saying that if they were needed again, they wouldn't go to the cabin. The excuse was that it was too far. They had a contract with us, which they were risking by refusing, and they had already gone to different places even further away. Everything, the whole situation was very strange. I took the car's camera to check if anything happened, but they told me it wasn't working. That was obviously a lie because we always checked it. So I ended up asking the tech support guy to give it a detailed check, saying that I really needed those images from the previous night, and he promised that he would recover them. The following days, I was so focused on other properties that I almost forgot the awful experience I had at that place. That's until my boss told me that someone was interested, and I had to show them the cabin. He also wanted me to take his son Andres with me so that he could gain some experience. Andres was a good, extremely intelligent guy, despite being only 19 years old. Even though most people thought that he was only working there because he was the owner's son, I had the chance to talk with him since we started on the same day. I truly believe he had inherited his parents' talents. I was also grateful that I didn't have to go back alone. It would have been crazy to tell my boss I was afraid of a cabin. It never even crossed my mind to tell him. Maybe that's why it was easy for him to tell me that he had 2 more clients scheduled for the following day, and he suggested that we stay overnight in the cabin to avoid a return trip. Great. I got ready this time around. I brought extra gasoline in case the generator failed or ran out. I carried a hunting knife that belonged to my father, and I also took a small cross that was blessed in the Vatican, which was actually my mother's most prized relic. I took it from the house without telling her, because I doubted she would lend it to me without explaining why I needed it. Andres picked me up in his dad's truck, an all-terrain vehicle built to withstand anything, which actually made me feel a little safe. However, since it wasn't a company vehicle, it didn't have the camera. It was a very nice day for the trip, but as soon as we left the city and arrived at the village, we noticed the black edge of a storm approaching. I called my boss from there and I told him it was likely that we would be hit by heavy rain. And I asked him if he was sure that the potential clients would still come despite that. He said yes, and I mentioned feeling a bit risky about it, and he replied that he had actually let us use his truck to avoid any excuses. I had no excuse. It was time to continue. I tried, without sounding scared, explained to Andres how strange this place was. Maybe I wouldn't have done it, but I felt obligated to notify the local guys that I would be at the cabin again and to let them know. They reassured me, if anything happens, go to the areas with signal and we'll come. That actually made me feel calm. Andres was a bit skeptical. He was actually making fun of me, but I didn't want to say anything. I prefer to think that nothing would happen and that I would come across as crazy, rather than him realizing how creepy that place could be. From that point on, I drove because I knew the road, and it was going to get tricky once we entered the dirt road. Almost like it was destined to be. The first drops of rain began to fall. We moved slowly and the rain was still very light. Andres rolled down his window, and so did I. It felt nice. The truck was built for this, so we weren't worried about getting wet. We stopped to enjoy the rain, but then I started to feel something I don't remember feeling before. With each meter that we advanced, it felt like we were heading towards danger, almost like we were walking into the mouth of a wolf, into the gates of hell. That's funny, Andres said. What's funny? I asked. If you look closely towards the trees, it feels like there's people among there. Almost like there are faces emerging from the branches, he replied. I looked to the sides, and after a few seconds, I noticed it too. It wasn't like there were real people there. It was more like there was something in the forest, as if there were ghostly figures standing among the trees. But it seemed like an illusion caused by the movement. I can't describe the relief I felt when I realized that there wasn't really any people standing there, watching us. When we got to the point where there was cell signal, I stopped and got out of the truck. I tied a ribbon to a tree, a golden ribbon. I told Andres that in case of an emergency, this was the only spot for miles where he could call for help and communicate with anybody outside of this. Alright, I'll come running back here to talk with my girlfriend, he said, pointing to his backpack where he had, indeed, running clothes. We continued the journey and finally arrived at the cabin. We got out of the truck and I stayed to unload my things while Andres went ahead with the keys. However, a few meters from the porch, he stopped, staring inside. I grabbed my backpack and stopped next to him. You feel it too? He asked. Yes, I replied. There's someone inside. It was strange. We could both sense it. We entered. Even though we checked every inch of the cabin, we felt like someone was here. Just as the rain started to pour even more, the client's truck arrived. However, it wasn't the interested party himself, but two people who worked for him. A man in his 40s with the appearance of an old movie accountant, and a young woman of about 25, small and thin, but with a much more imposing presence. From the communication, we realized that she was in charge of all the decisions. Sorry that our boss couldn't come, but he does trust any decision that we make. He asked us to check a few things, and if everything meets the requirements, he'll end up coming with an offer, she said. We had no reason not to believe them. The interested party was the owner of a chain of a regional retail store. They quickly glanced around the inside of the cabin, and without asking us a single question, went outside. It almost seemed like their boss cared more about the surroundings. The man went into the forest, and the woman asked us for some reason to show her where the septic tank was located. It was very strange, but we assumed these were normal details that they were interested in. We stood on the porch waiting for them. The rain started pouring, but it didn't seem to bother them. I noticed Andres was looking towards the trees at the spot where I thought I had seen the woman the first time. And I kid you not, the same thing was there. "Look, it looks like there's a woman standing there," I said. "There is a woman standing there, dude," he replied, very serious. He grabbed my shoulder to stop me from moving, insisting that I pay attention. I noticed how that face, which seemed to be formed by chance among the branches, had moved. It turned to the side and disappeared into the trees. Before we could do anything, we heard the man returning through the trees from the opposite direction that we were looking. He shouted to the woman that everything was ready and that he had found it. We didn't understand what he meant. The woman approached them and asked if everything was ready. He replied yes, everything was there, whatever it was. She turned to me and said that her boss would contact my boss. "No, he needs to negotiate with me," I responded. "No, they have to negotiate with me," she replied firmly, and without saying anything else, they headed back to the truck. The man approached us and asked if we were staying the night, and if we wanted to drive together to the village. "We're actually gonna stay. We have to show the cabin again tomorrow, but thank you," I said. "Look man, we're actually gonna make an offer, but don't stay here," he said, sounding concerned. Or at least that's how it seemed like. "Thanks, you can make an offer, but we're expecting one from a client who already visited, and also the response from tomorrow's clients. Try to contact Carlos as soon as possible to give you priority. He's actually in charge of the sale," I said, trying to sound confident. "Y'all two take care on the way back," Andres also said, trying to sound professional. No one had ever visited the cabin before, and we weren't sure what would happen the next day, but it was a good technique. It put us back in the spot of making the actual decision. "Do you really think they'll scare us away so we won't show it tomorrow?" Andres asked once the man left. "Imagine bringing a woman to stand far away to scare us, thinking we believe in the paranormal." Andres grabbed his phone and raincoat, and he told me he wouldn't take long. He was gonna walk to the area with a signal to talk to his girlfriend. I told him it was very far on foot, but he said he liked the rain and the mountains and would be fine. I looked at him as he walked away, but I ran to catch up with him. I handed him the hunting knife and I asked him to take it with him. After I lost sight of him, I went to the truck and got the cross. Somehow, I felt like it protected me more than the actual knife. It was getting dark, and that's when I heard a strange sound coming from the back of the cabin, among the trees, like an animal, but a huge one, almost like a bull, or something like that. I then heard the branches move, almost like something very tall was walking through them. I ran back to the truck, and I parked it closer to the cabin, ensuring it was nearby in case of any emergency. When I got out of the truck, I went inside the cabin. I closed the door, and for some reason, I felt like I needed to look through the window, and that's when I saw it. A figure among the trees. Keep in mind it was almost completely dark outside, and just like that, it disappeared. At this point I was questioning myself if I was going crazy. I sat down for a few minutes, trying to figure out what the hell was going on, and as I was sitting in the cabin, that's when I heard footsteps outside. I figured it was Andres who had came back already, or chose to come back instead of continuing on. But that's when I noticed that the rain had stopped. As I peered out the window to see who was outside, that's when I saw it. Not one, not two, 3 or 4, but 5 figures among the trees. At least 5 from what I remember, moving as if surrounding the cabin. I couldn't tell if they were naked but they seemed to be from that distance in the darkness. There were some smaller ones and others that were tall, like men and women. Then I noticed one of them deviated from the trees and started walking towards the cabin. At that moment, the motion sensor light outside activated, and I could see him much more clear now. He was wearing a crown of thorns, and he was bleeding from the forehead. It was obvious that this man was dressed like Jesus. As soon as the light hit his face, he took a few steps back, and then I heard a car approaching in the distance. The man disappeared, but when the car arrived, I recognized the people inside, workers from the village. In the back seat, Andres was lying down, completely pale, as if he had seen a ghost. I hurried to greet them, but Andres ran past me, ignoring me, and rushed into the cabin. They parked the truck next to mine, almost touching the stairs. They even backed it up as if ready to leave at full speed. I wanted to ask what was happening, but they told me to get inside quickly without wasting time. And we did, and they started checking all the windows. "Do you have enough gas in the generator to last all night?" one of them asked me. "I do, but what's going on?" I replied. They signaled for me to stay silent, turned off all the lights except the one at the entrance, which didn't face the path. They waited for Andres to come out of the bathroom, and then we all went into the office. They turned off the desk lamp, leaving us in complete darkness. With the office door open to hear any sounds from outside, someone knocked on the door. Andres seemed out of it. Despite the workers signaling for me not to, I left the office. Not that I was trying to be a hero, but I wanted to keep everybody safe. I crawled across the floor of the cabin until I could see the door. The light outside seemed to have gone out. The knocking continued. I moved through the cabin, trying to figure out how many people were outside. I couldn't hear anything, and the door didn't seem to open despite the knocking. It was as if something had touched the door and then disappeared. I started crawling across the living room to get to a window where I thought I could see the entrance. That's when I started getting this terrifying feeling, a feeling of being frozen and numb, as if my body was starting to go to sleep, and I started struggling to respond. I stopped in the middle of the living room, the most exposed part. I looked up at the window that I was trying to get to, and that's when I saw something clearly, despite the darkness. A woman at the window. It didn't close completely, and through that small gap, something was trying to poke its head through, staring at me. The only way to describe her is that she looked very demonic. That's when I screamed. They all said that I screamed very loud, but I don't remember. I only remember ending up with broken nails and splintered hands, somehow dragging myself back to the office. The next thing I remember was about half an hour later. I couldn't speak. They say that I kept screaming, and that Andres was also in a terrible state, looking for the keys, telling everybody that we had to go. They started laughing, saying, "We won't get far. All the roads disappear at these hours. We should stay here a bit. Maybe in the meantime, they'll leave." I didn't understand what they meant, but that's when one of the workers said to come look out the window, and it'll make sense. That's when we saw figures walking away slowly, taking one step every few seconds. Among them, I thought I saw the woman from the window. She was wearing a mantle similar to the Virgen of Guadalupe, but black and gold. I saw it clearly and connected it to the man dressed like Jesus. I didn't understand what kind of strange, crazy people were around here, where they came from, or what they wanted from us. I had so many questions. Why were the workers there if they were so afraid of these mountains and roads? Why did they even come for us? Could I even trust them? There was no reason for them to lie. They knew we would be here because I had notified them. I know it was a good choice to tell them this because they kept an eye on the cars heading from the village to the mountain. They started telling us that they saw the clients who went to see the cabin for the buyer. When they passed by, They only noted the vehicle. However, when they returned, they arrived at their shop with a scratched and dusty truck, branches stuck to the front. It looked like they had driven through bushes rather than the actual road. The truck was also extremely hot and steaming from the engine, as if it was an old or damaged vehicle, but it was actually quite new. They said that when they saw it going up, it was in perfect condition. That's when the man who got out of it collapsed on the ground, and the woman that was driving asked them to check the damage and to see if they could make it to the city. They asked what happened, and the young woman asked them to just fix the truck enough so they could continue their journey. She walked away to make a phone call. The man that was with her began to catch his breath and told them an animal had crossed their path, causing them to veer off the road and fall into a shallow ravine. Fortunately, the truck managed to climb out with its four-wheel drive. The animal had followed them for some time. Well, there are very few deer around here. I don't know what kind of animal could have made you veer off the road and then follow you through the brush, one of the workers replied. Are you sure it was an animal? Well, what else could it be? The man said, seeming to get agitated just by the memory. We were driving normally when it came at us. It was on two legs, but it wasn't a person. It wasn't a woman, even though it looked like one. Its face was snout, demonic-like. He didn't even have to describe it more. They already knew what he was talking about. Knowing the stories of what supposedly happened to outsiders who venture into the forest, everyone in the village knew the stories, but very few had actually experienced them. Apparently, even fewer had seen her, if you could actually call her that. But the ones who would often suffer, especially those who came from outside. They couldn't understand why there was so much traffic heading to that area despite the stories. Maybe nobody believed in what the villagers would tell them. I'm not even sure why they chose to come for us. Maybe they liked me, or maybe they knew that I was going to have more work there. When they heard the couple's story about what had forced them off the road, they finished fixing the truck, closed the shop, and headed to the cabin. Far from the area with cell signal, closer to the highway, someone suddenly crossed their path. They were driving slowly, alert because it was getting dark, when something jumped in front of their truck. It was Andres, asking for help, terrified, saying over and over that something was following him and that they should turn back and head to the village. But they told him that he couldn't leave me alone there, convincing him to return to the cabin. As they drove, they said that they saw several people approaching from the same direction, not ghostly figures, but actual people walking towards the cabin where I was waiting. These people didn't react to their presence. However, Andres was terrified because he had seen something very different. They arrived at the cabin just in time and were now ready to spend the rest of the night with us. No one leaves the forest at those hours, and now we're there just waiting. After a while, these figures that had tried to enter the cabin, or at least had approached to knock, had started moving away. Who were those strange people? What were they actually doing there? Not even the workers could explain it. Suddenly, we heard something in the distance, and Andres ran to hide underneath the bed. I'm not lying. He actually ran to hide like a kid, followed by the others who pulled me with them, all scared. Their calm demeanor had completely disappeared. She's here. She's here. She's here, they repeated, even though everything was locked and we had secured the windows. We all hid underneath the bed like children. Whatever was outside, it felt different. Underneath the bed, Andres had stopped responding. He had passed out, and our instincts were telling us that we were in the presence of something horrible. Then, there was some kind of crying, something that made it clear that it wasn't an animal, for no animal in the world sounds like that. But I know it wasn't human, and then suddenly, everything felt different. I'm not even sure how to explain it. but there was a silence that felt almost like tranquilizing. I stood up with one of the workers and we approached the door. Somehow, the fact that we were no longer in fear from moments before indicated that it was no longer near. It's like you could feel it inside your chest when it was there, but now it wasn't. We stepped outside and it seemed like there was very little air. We couldn't hear anything, and it was very difficult to breathe. We managed to wake up Andres and got together near the door, ready to run to the vehicles if anything else happened. However, Andres looked very fragile. I felt like he couldn't handle another situation, and I was actually worried for him. I suddenly touched my pocket, and I realized I no longer had my cross. It wasn't with me. I started looking for it all over the cabin, under the bed, on the bed, but it wasn't there. My mind started to clear as I retraced my steps from that night. Then it hit me. We still had to show the cabin the next day. I couldn't return to my boss with just a ghost story. I had to convince Andres not to say anything. We would be made fun of. No one would believe us. I would probably get fired, even if all of us told the same story. Andres fell asleep with a fever, and he started sweating as well. I tried to convince the workers to stay at least until the morning, to just pretend to do some repairs and wait while we showed the cabin. I couldn't leave without doing it, and I didn't want to be left alone if they ended up taking Andres. I convinced them by offering to pay them, as if they had done some repair work. After a few minutes of them talking between themselves, they agreed. By the way, it was only 2 workers. That night was terrifying. Also, there are 2 things I want you to understand. 2 things that I haven't shared yet, and that I don't want to share with the general public. That's the name of the workers. Why? Well, they still live in the village, and it could be dangerous for them if revealed. And the name that the locals gave to this thing that's in here in the forest, well, it's a name that they told me only once that night. And they clearly said that it should never be repeated, especially not outside of here. Anyways, the night went on and we didn't even sleep. As dawn approached, I thought everything had passed, at least for that night. However, something else happened. Just as the other presence had made me feel fear when it was nearby, I had this feeling to look from the window. When I did, I saw it from behind a tree trunk. It was hairless, very pale. The features, the eyes, the nose, and the mouth looked more like black smudges. It was something very strange that seemed more like a vision that you get when you don't sleep. I told the workers to come look at the window, and they did. It was strange. I can't assure you that it happened, but we thought we saw it peek and then run towards the mountain, and it was still naked and thin. That's when the worker said that whenever dawn approaches, there was always somebody heading up to the mountain. They said that's why people come from far away for the door. When I asked what they meant, they only answered that they were talking about the door to hell. It was strange, to say the least. I can describe it somehow, knowing about this belief. I'm not saying that I think it's true. I swear on my children's lives that even I don't know what to believe. Even if I were in your place, listening to the story, I wouldn't believe it. That's why it's so difficult to share it. But I think that no one shares their experiences when something happens that goes beyond a paranormal situation, like hearing voices or seeing a dead relative at home. People are comfortable believing in that, but not something more. Even though the world is full of evil things, spirits and everything, proving it to us every day and every night. Everything changed when I realized I was sleeping a few feet from a door to hell, and yet nothing was happening. The last minutes of darkness that night were peaceful. When the dawn came, we had breakfast with coffee and cookies, the only thing that we had available. By 9 o'clock, the 2 workers started cleaning around the septic tank in the back, pretending to do some repairs. Right at 9, we saw 2 new black current year model trucks arrive. The windows had that super dark tint that you couldn't see inside. We knew right away that these might be very special clients. I approached them a few feet to welcome them. Andres was still very unwell, trying to compose himself inside the cabin. From one of the trucks, a short man with a military haircut got out, and he walked to the second truck, where someone rolled down the window slightly. He made a signal and 2 more men got out of the first truck. It was clear to me now that they looked more like bodyguards or military personnel than assistants, unlike the ones from the previous day. They said they would inspect the place. I tried to give them some information about the purchase options, but they said everything was already arranged. "Do you want to hear a tune?" the first man who got out asked with a smile, referring to a hit song by the singer who owned the place. Honestly, I said I didn't. His smile faded, and they headed to the back. Another man with the same look got out of the truck and stayed back, and started walking towards the forest. At that moment, I realized that they were looking for the same thing as the previous clients, but that only raised more questions about this place, about what it was, and what could actually be out here. As I continued looking, the somewhat friendly bodyguard approached me again. "Do you think it will interest your boss?" he asked. "People have shown a lot of interest," I said. Without responding, he walked into the cabin where Andres was still pale, sitting in the living room. "Is he alright?" he asked, sounding concerned. Andres, still in a terrible state, looked up and nodded weakly. "Does he need anything?" the bodyguard asked. He replied that everything was fine. The guy continued walking, closing the door behind him. He didn't even try to hide what he was doing. He started kicking the floor as if searching for something. Then, he opened the door and told me, "Crazy people, huh?" He kept smiling and left. I didn't even dare ask him anything. When I stepped out, I saw 2 of the bodyguards checking the workers' credentials. I told them everything was fine and that they were trustworthy. "Alright then," they said, handing back the credentials. They all returned to the trucks except for the one who had stayed with me in front of the cabin. I thought he was going to make small talk or ask a question, but he just stood there with a mocking smile. I think he knew I had thousands of questions for him, but I didn't dare ask. That's when someone whistled from the trees. The guy from the other truck, the one who had gotten out later, approached and handed something to the man in charge. Then he walked towards me, standing next to Andres and the 2 workers. "Did any of you lose this?" he asked, holding out a cross that was covered in dirt. My mother's cross. It looked like it was buried for a long time, old and worn, and even had some mold on it. "Yeah, it's mine," I said. "Be careful where you leave these things around here," he said, getting too close to me. He added something in a seemingly friendly tone, but it sounded like a threat to me as well. "Don't show it to anyone else, and leave this place. You don't want anything to do with fixing things here anymore. Get to an area with cell signal. My boss will take care of the purchase." He got into the truck. As they turned around to leave, he rolled down the window and motioned for me to come closer. "I don't mean this in a bad way, but leave and take your commission. I actually spent a night alone out here." His eyes widened. "You've been here since last night? Then take your things and get out of here. Go slowly so you can catch up to us." I'm not sure why, but he seemed sincere. I told the others to pack everything, and we ended up leaving quickly, especially Andres and me, knowing that we wouldn't have to return if it was sold. We sped up as much as we could, as much as the road allowed. It felt like it was disappearing at times. We ended up following closely behind them on the dirt road, and once we reached the highway, they drove off as if it were an emergency, and we lost sight of them. I called my boss and found out that there were already 2 offers on the table. The first from the previous day's clients. but he said we had to accept this latest one. I didn't even want to ask why. Once I got off the phone, I tried to talk to Andres, trying to calm him down before we headed back to the village. We arrived at the village and one of the workers offered to let us rest for a while there. I ended up leaving Andres sleeping, hoping that he would feel better. But people were friendly. Well, they always been. In these remote, smaller villages in Mexico, everyone seems to get right along and be treated like family. The worker who let us stay in their home went to his shop, leaving us in the care of Don Teo, his father. He was an older man but still strong, with a rancher's build. He was very kind, setting up a place for Andres to rest. Don Teo said that I should let him be alone, and to take a look around at the shops and the stands. I found a table on the sidewalk where a lady was selling some homemade food, and I ordered something without thinking twice. She was selling some gorditas. The lady sat with me as I ate. Did you come to see her too? Are you here to ask for something? If you did, don't do it. The last ones who came never came back. They were the ones who always came staying all night. But one day, they didn't come back. We knew they were important because the army and helicopters came looking for them, but they were never found. As the lady spoke, it started to rain, so she moved me to a table under a small roof in her yard. The village was set up to where someone's house was basically their store as well, with stands right in front of their porch. With the rain, the few people on the street went inside, disappearing from sight. I finished my meal and was ready to leave. I didn't want to hear anything that this lady had to say. I just wanted to sleep. I was exhausted. But that's when the shouts of Don Teo got my attention. He's gone. The boy is gone. I ran towards where the shouting was coming from and saw that our truck was no longer there. Andres had left in it. How was I going to get back? What was I going to tell his father? Besides, he didn't look too well to be driving safe. I quickly asked Don Teo how I could get to the city to try to catch up with him. He looked at me and said he didn't head to the city. He went back up towards the cabin. How is that possible? I said. He couldn't have done that. I didn't want to go back up there. Not again. I asked Don Teo if Andres had said anything before he left, and he told me that Andres had woken up clutching his chest, asking for his medallion. I then remembered the medallion of the Virgin Mary that Andres always wore, given to him by his late grandmother as he had said. I couldn't believe he had gone back for it. It was like searching for a needle in a haystack. I asked Don Teo about his son, and he said he would be back soon from the shop. However, he did offer to take me up there. I must have looked so scared that he felt sorry for me, which is most likely why he helped. I mean, Don Teo looked up there in age. So we got into an old beat-up car that barely seemed to run, and very slowly we began going up to the cabin. The wipers didn't work, so we moved at a snail's pace. We reached the end of the paved road and continued on the dirt path. Eventually, Don Teo said this was as far as he could go. The car wouldn't make it any further and would get stuck. I thanked him for helping me so much and got out. As I did, Don Teo told me, "Whatever you do, don't spend the night here." After about 20 minutes, I found myself at the familiar spot with cell signal. It wasn't yet 5 p.m., but it felt like the night could engulf the place at any moment. I ran through all the mud and puddles, and that's when I saw our truck. It was locked, which I took as a sign that Andres had left it that way. The thunder indicated that the storm was only going to get worse. As I kept running towards the cabin, I saw it from a distance. However, I slowed down before I made it to the tree line. On the porch of the cabin, I saw something. It was that woman. That horrible, disfigured woman. She was sitting at the front porch. She was looking down, but I could tell she was smirking. I hid behind a tree, peering out cautiously. I realized I was at the very tree from where those things had been watching the house. I looked around nervously, feeling like all hell was going to break loose. The cabin was not an option. There was no way I was going to go into that cabin. and I wasn't planning on getting any closer. And where the heck was Andres at? I had to get back with him, but there was nowhere to run. I had to find him. To be honest, I did want to head back, saying that it was his fault for coming back here, but I felt guilty. I couldn't leave without Andres. I couldn't abandon him. Could he be inside the cabin trapped? Did he go back and I missed him on the way here? One thing was for sure. I wasn't gonna go inside the cabin, not with this creepy lady in the porch waiting. So I left. I didn't know what to do. Maybe he's on the way back to the vehicle and I can catch up to him. And worst case scenario is that I end up trapped up here alone in the rainy night. What stupid decision did I make? I should have just waited for him at the truck, or left a note on the truck or something. I then started panicking. Fuck, I gotta make it back before he leaves. That's when I started running back. The storm was approaching quickly, and the forest was becoming darker. I kept moving, calling out for Andres, but only the sound of the wind and distant thunder responded. The trees were swaying, and I continued, and I swear I would see shadows in between the trees. After what felt like an eternity, I saw a faint light in the distance. It was coming from a small clearing up ahead. I approached quietly, my heart pounding, and there, in the middle of the clearing, was Andres. He was holding his medallion and looking confused and scared. Andres, I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. He turned, relief washing over his face when he saw me. Thank God, he whispered, clutching the medallion tightly. I found it, thanks to her, pointing to his medallion. But I got lost on the way back. We need to get out of here, I said, grabbing his arm and guiding him back through the forest. The storm was almost upon us, and the path seemed to be even more rocky on the way back. We hurried as fast as we could. The storm broke, rain started pouring down, and thunder started cracking overhead, but it felt like a relief compared to what we had just been through. However, those feelings of relief quickly faded when I thought I saw people walking in the same direction as us, figures among the trees next to us. I know it wasn't my imagination, because Andres was also seeing it. We started running as fast as we could, before realizing that we should have got into the truck by now. Instead, we ended up coming close to a ravine. Damn it, where are we? We stopped for a second and looked around. I could see with the remaining light a canyon at its bottom, something that looked like a cave, and right in front of it, I saw silhouettes of people. There were about 13 of them, holding hands and forming a circle. Then there were 6 more holding hands and forming another circle around the first 3. And then more and more circles. I couldn't count how many there was, but there were 6 circles of people, one inside the other. We started running again towards what we assumed to be where the truck was at. At this point, we both said screw the truck, and if we have to run all the way to the village, so be it. As we were running, about 50 meters behind us, I turned to see if any of those things were following us. Well, of course they were. Why did I even look back? At the strike of a lightning flash, I saw something running towards us on that very same path. It was the woman, the one with the fucked up legs, running right after us, with her head sideways, almost like it was falling, smirking. I'm not sure what I believe anymore, or what I saw, because even Andres didn't confirm. But I swear that the woman looked almost skeletal, as if she barely had skin, or like if it was rotting, like a running corpse. I convinced myself I was just imagining, just the light from the lightning, that I saw nothing. That's when we started praying to all the saints, to God, to our Mother of Christ to guard us from all this evil. And Andres started screaming, Dios mío, por favor ayúdame. God, please, help us. I could hear the sound of her running behind us, getting closer. And that's when I heard the scream that still haunts me to this day, a demonic scream. At this point, I just closed my eyes as I knew we were about to be taken to I don't know where. And that's when I heard a voice behind us. It was her. She whispered,
Te veré en tus sueños. I'll see you in your dreams.
and just like that, the running sounds behind us ceased. I looked back and nobody was there. Suddenly ahead, I saw some lights that brought me back to life. They were the lights of a patrol vehicle, or so we thought at first. But as we got closer, we realized it was a rescue ambulance. We ran to them, begging for help, screaming. Don Teo was standing there beside our truck with 2 paramedics. At this point, Andres was yelling for help as we got to the clearing. The paramedics checked us, attended to us, and one of them took the keys to our truck and drove it behind the ambulance back to the village. We were trembling so much we couldn't have driven. We were in the back of the truck. Alright, let me explain. This isn't like the States. We're in a remote village where the ambulance is not a covered van. This was a makeshift truck with a high tarp over the bed. Don Teo had mentioned that he had to beg and beg for responders to go up to the cabin, as it was forbidden. But the ambulance that the village uses might have been able to go, and he pretty much had to convince them to come. I told the paramedic about the people we saw, that there were a whole bunch of people back there, like some secret cult or something. No, brother, he said. Nadie va allá arriba. No one goes up there anymore. All the roads are closed. The last ones who went up there never came back down. We got to the village. They waited for us to ensure we could drive, as we were ready to leave at that moment, after calming down a bit. They were trying to convince us to spend the night. We kept insisting we saw people, swearing we saw something very strange as well. The young paramedic who drove our truck, a medical intern, said, "Look, I'll be honest, we don't believe in that stuff, but we can tell you what the locals have told us. They say those people are dead, strange folks who used to come here, and then suddenly stopped returning. They said that their souls went into that cave, through the door as they call it, but their bodies stayed around here. People say that the cave is a portal to hell." Andres was shaking his head as the intern spoke. "I know what you're thinking. They're just stories or legends. But that's what they say. They say that those bodies move every night, so they are never found." We then went back to Don Teo's house. I thanked him for his help, and we rested for a while, trying to shake off everything that just happened. Andres was still shaken, but he was slowly getting better. We did spend the night there, as it was pretty dark to head back to the city at that time. The next morning, we left early, determined to never return to that cabin again. My boss told us that the sale was finalized. I didn't even ask any more questions, just glad anything to do with this fucked up cabin was finally done. It was around midnight when I finally dropped off Andres at his house. Everything in the city seemed strange to me, almost surreal, as if nothing could scare me anymore. I was grateful to see this side of life. We never did go back to the cabin again. I was able to get the pictures that I requested from the guy that was in charge of all the cameras. I'm gonna try to take a picture of it and share more information with you, but it's gonna have to wait until I finally resign to start my own business in the same field. Me and Andres did go to church for the next few weekends, trying to receive blessings and cleansings from the priest, which do seem to work as nothing happened after that. However, there is one thing that still scares me to this day, and that's every time that I'm gonna go to sleep, I hear those words, the words of that lady.
Te veré en tus sueños. I'll see you in your dreams.
Every old-timer in Alum Creek has their own story of what happened. Hell, even half the young people think they know how it went down. Don't listen to anyone who wasn't there. It's like that game we used to play as young kids where you take a piece of yarn tied to 2 cups and pass it around a circle repeating some sort of message. Telephone. That's what we called it. Only difference is that in the telephone game, the story starts off as something simple and gets more and more crazy as it goes. But this story, it gets more and more credible the younger the teller, almost like it's too much to be believed. So listeners correct for realism when they retell it, so as not to sound crazy. My own grandson told me the other day that I remember it wrong, that it was all just some sort of tragic accident about a bear. Something ain't right about that. A 12-year-old kid telling his grandfather what he should and shouldn't remember. So don't listen to the young people. They weren't there. The truth is, most of us old folks weren't there either. The way we talk, you would guess every miner in town was caught up in it all. Like how every boomer will tell you he was at Woodstock. It was only maybe 20 of us. Of those, a sight more than half are dead and buried, except for old Rashi Singh. The bastard had himself cremated. I'll start over. Forgive me if I repeat myself. 1956. Like just about every young man, I was working in the mines. Hard work. Plus nothing else paid as good. Nothing I was qualified for at any rate. And I had a wife, a kid, and another one on the way to support. Besides, my friends were also in the mining business. Ralph Hatfield, Rashi, and Sid. We would hit the bars after work, with me leaving early on account of the family, and Rashi would just get some juice. Now Ralph didn't much care for the bartender. Most of us didn't. Jesse tended bar not because he was especially good at it, but because he didn't have the stomach for man's work. He even hired kids to mow his lawn and do landscaping. He wasn't ashamed of it. He thought it made him smarter than the rest of us. I don't know if I ever caught Jesse in town without some full sideways grin. Ralph suspected that Jesse got his job by sleeping with the widow bar owner. I don't think so, but it wasn't impossible. Jesse had nearly half a dozen exes, or current lovers. He was smooth with women and had a pretty face, high cheekbones, sharp nose. That was enough reason for most of us to dislike him. Ralph had more claim to hate Jesse than most. Those who aren't from West Virginia probably know all about the Hatfields and McCoys, but that's nothing compared to the families of Ralph and Jesse. You see, during the Cold Wars, Ralph's family fought for the Unions, and Jesse's family owned the mines. But if you gave Jesse a hard time about it, he would always come back with something to say. Jesse was always a funny guy. That, combined with the fact that he never got angry, kept the rest of us from truly hating him, except for, of course, Ralph. June 10th was when it all started. Cicada season. They were bad that year, too. So many damn insects you could hydroplane on their guts if your tire threads were bare. The mine was a safe place from them. You wouldn't have to listen to the never-ending screech. But on this season, the mine was even worse than the outside. It echoed. It's not even pretty sounding like a cricket, at least not to me. So it's no wonder we ended up working deeper than we normally would. We got far enough that we couldn't hear a peep and went to work. A couple of hours into the day. Anytime there was a crack, the rest of us were nervous to slide through. But Rashi was a skinny guy and could damn near fit through the bars on a baby's crib. Rashi would have it covered. We waited around for no more than 10 minutes before Rashi squeezed back towards us. I had never seen the man so excited. "Stop everyone right now," he said with an accent. "It's a treasure room. In most mines, the demolition experts calculate the proper amount of black powder, and then everyone draws straws on who has to light the fuse. But most mines didn't employ Sid, the craziest son of a bitch I ever knew. Sid did all the blasting himself. He loved to be as close to the explosion as he was allowed to. Most of us figured that he was going to end up going the way of his grandfather and die in such a blast. But he blew the neck wide open without event, and we all had to look for ourselves. What we saw was a gold mine. Well, no, it wasn't. It was a coal mine, but there was a lot of coal that was easy to collect. The owner was too excited. He hired everyone in town not already working for him, at least twice the normal rate. Even Jesse couldn't resist a few weeks of hard labor for that kind of money. We ended up working like dogs all week, taking as many hours at double pay as possible. Predictably, Jesse was the laziest of all, but we needed him to have enough energy to pour our drinks after work, so no one said a thing. Now, I'm not sure who saw it. I want to say it was Jesse who came strutting back with a proud smile to tell us all of his find. Jesse, or whoever it was, found yet another neck, one that was wide enough that anyone could walk through. The new room was small, but filled with coal. Loose coal too. That should have been the first sign. Coal doesn't just sit on the surface, stacked knee deep, ready to be scooped up into bags. But we were greedy, and now we had 2 rooms to work. A handful of guys I barely knew ended up working the smaller room. We called it the Pirate's Chest. I'll admit we were greedy. We robbed pillars and were too aggressive with the cutting machine. But that room, it shouldn't have collapsed the way it did. I've been in natural collapses before. This was not one of them. Some of the miners will tell you that everything was quiet and normal, like right up until the cave-in. But no, there was one sound. A sound that still haunts me even now. The most rational explanation is that the men in the Pirate's Chest shouted before the rocks gave way. But I know what I heard. It was a scream, but not a human one. It wasn't a shout of anger or fear. If you ask me how I figure a demon might yawn, I would tell you I don't have to guess. That sound, that was us waking something up. Something buried underneath all that coal. That 3 or so men working the treasure room got sucked under that big pile of black. That's when the cave-in started. It was the big chamber that went first. The one that me and my buddies were working. The hallway Sid had blasted out fell in on itself without so much as a groan to warn us. Most were able to run through the corridor in time and make it out. A couple were buried in the rubble, crushed flat as pancakes. Hooper Collins had his leg pinned underneath a boulder, which would be the depth of him, 19 or 20, I think. The guy had a pretty wife and no kids by her yet. Anyways, I noticed poor Hooper hollering and screaming. I did the best that I could to roll the rock off his leg. I wasn't even finished before Ralph screamed and pointed. A couple of the new recruits had rushed into that small room to avoid the boulders. Foolish mistake. Then, the screams I heard next were definitely human. I didn't watch. I didn't see. But you can't mistake the sound of flesh being yanked apart. So I gave up on Hooper and ran for the rest of the survivors. I still try to forget how he begged me not to run, the words that he used. I failed at that. I ran. Not far, just around a corner, and soon every healthy body was huddled around the cave-in. Desperately trying to dig out. It was pointless, but I jumped in anyway. What else could I do? When the screaming stopped, that's when the eating began. It must have gone on for half an hour, tearing, cracking. We all knew what the entree was, and each of us were digging faster. Eventually, of course, the panic wore off and we had time to think. What was back there? But most important, what would it do when it's done with its meal? And we all knew that we hadn't made progress escaping. West Virginians are just stubborn, I guess. As horrifying as the sounds were, the silence was far worse. The dinner was done. Hopefully, it was filling. Everyone stopped. We need to figure this out, screamed Sid. He held up his light and we all faced him. Over a dozen of us were huddled, some crying, but all of us were shaking as if naked in a blizzard. We took a break from the digging and shut up for a moment. Everyone except for Rodney, the preacher's son, who fell to his knees and wouldn't stop praying no matter what the rest of us did. Rodney wasn't half as holy as his father, but at least one of us asking heaven for help couldn't have hurt. Finally, someone spoke. It was Ralph. He always had a clear head, even did a couple of years of college. He kept his voice lower than Sid had. It's gonna take days to dig ourselves out. That thing will get us if dehydration doesn't. And it's guarding the TNT, if that becomes our only option. We can post a watch, guards to make sure it doesn't come in here. It was Jesse who said it, trying. to maintain his composure. Are you volunteering? You'll rather stand around and dig like the rest of us, said Ralph. Most of the water and lights are in the room with it, said Sid. We got it outnumbered. Can it die? Of course, said Ralph. I read a whole issue on undiscovered things in the National Geographic. Most life in the ocean is unknown, and there's all sorts of cave creatures that we never knew about. This thing is an animal, and animals can die. What does it eat? I asked. No one responded for a minute. Then Ralph nodded. The coal's energy too, made of carbon, just like living things. There's animals and critters out there that digest minerals. Now, I can't speak to the accuracy of this claim, or even my memory, but I wanted to think that Ralph was right. It was an animal. I'm not sure I believed it, but I wanted to. Around that time, Rodney stopped praying and shouted at us. It's no animal. It's no natural thing at all. It's a demon, drawn to our greed and wickedness. Rodney, please, said Jesse in a whisper. I think it was Sid that hit him in the back of the head. Not hard enough to knock him unconscious, but with plenty of force to knock him over and shut him up. Right away, Rashi went to go tend to Rod, giving Sid a sharp glare. No one else seemed to care. I don't know of many animals that can survive being hit with 7, 8 pickaxes, said someone whose name and face I can't recall. 9 by my count. It was Ralph. He didn't have to tell us the math, that there wasn't enough access for everyone. Rodney could barely walk, and Paul had a broken arm, which left me and 2 others to fight with rocks. Rashi was a little luckier. He kept this special blade on him everywhere he went. It was a long dagger with all sorts of ornaments. In the 50s, in Appalachia, a knife wouldn't bother anybody. Shoot, back then it wasn't uncommon for a guy to walk through town with a 6-shooter on his belt. None of us had a gun, of course, but I would have traded my rock for a good knife any day. The biggest threat here is going to be friendly fire. Who was the fellow who said that? Can't get his name. I remember his stories, and he had been a sergeant in Korea. Damn, fuck, age is a hell of a theme. Anyways, the veteran advised us a bit. Watch where you swing, but don't stop hitting it until it stops moving. We drew up a battle plan with the sergeant's help, who would approach from what angle. The longer we waited, the more we feared we would lose our nerve. The creature hadn't made a sound for so long, only added to our worries. Was it planning something? Was it even smart enough to plan, as a unit? We rounded the bend and shined our lights the best we could. Half the standing lights were out, and out of all the remaining ones, most were knocked over. Little strips of white shined in random directions, like some sort of pattern, but unless it was hiding in the shadows, it was no creature. Blood and gut trails told a story, that the thing had drugged the dead into the pirate's chest to feast. Hooper's leg was still pinned underneath the boulder, but there was no sign of the rest of him. No one wanted to be first in line, so we crept towards what had to be this animal's real lair, weapons raised. About halfway there, something dropped onto us, or rather, onto Sarge. We hadn't even thought about an attack from above, so the whole plan was shot. Half of us ran, half attacked. I did a little bit of both. Before I go further, I'm gonna try my best to describe the creature. Just keep in mind, this was about 30 or 35 years ago. It moved faster than a rabbit, and I only ever got a real good look at it one time, at least with my own eyes. I can't count how many times I've seen it in dreams, but I suppose I saw it well enough for any man. But how tall I can't even guess, 'cause it was bent over with the twistiest damn pretzel of a spine I ever saw. At least 4 legs and as many arms, and at the end of each limb, a dozen fingers. Or maybe they were antennas, legs on a shrimp. Shit, I don't even know. I know it didn't have eyes. I do remember that. It only had one thing on its head, the mouth. A cross between the tail of an earwig and a crocodile's maw. But boy, was it skinny. Too skinny for how strong it was. And the flesh didn't look so tough. Translucent, almost worm-like. It had armor, like that of an insect, but the plates intersected more like the shell of a crawfish. Any more descriptions would be stretching the truth on my part. Whatever it was, an insect or a demon, it tore the sergeant apart in seconds. I couldn't bring myself to charge in close, so I threw my rock at its head. May as well have thrown a beach ball. Even the axe swings of these men were making cracks in it. I grabbed the pick that Sarge had dropped, or had his hand been ripped apart. Either way, I almost stepped on it when this thing ended up grabbing Ralph. I would like to think that I would have helped out if Rashi hadn't acted first. Rashi stuck that holy dagger of his into this monster easy as cutting cake. Your guess is as good as mine as why it worked. Maybe the dagger was better quality than the picks. Maybe something else. But the thing recoiled without making a sound and Ralph was free. Lucky stab or not, 2 more bodies were laying at this creature's feet, and there was nothing to do but run again. At least that's what everyone thought who wasn't Sid. In the midst of everything, he was able to find and light a stick of dynamite. "Keep your distance, boys," he shouted, running back to the fight. Don't get any romantic notion that Sid was a martyr. I knew the man as well as anybody, and he had no intention of dying. Just like he had no plan to slip on a pile of guts, twist his ankle too bad to stand, lose his grip on the explosive, and fail to catch the monster in the blast. All but 1 or 2 of us cleared the explosion, not counting Sid, who went out like everybody had guessed but in circumstances an oracle couldn't have predicted. At least we were alive. Our eyes and ears were none too happy, but the monster seemed worse off, skittering about in random directions, tripping over itself. A sound-driven creature, blinded by the noise. Maybe. We had to leave. Ralph spotted our way out, a chimney blown open by the blast. We would have to brave the middle of the room, praying the monster would avoid us with its random shuffles, and it would take 2 men to reach the opening, one on the shoulders of the other. What choice did we have? We went for it. I recall Jesse weeping as he climbed onto my back, and for a moment, I judged him for it, until I realized that I was crying too. To his credit, Jesse felt a ledge once through the opening, and did his best to pull the rest of us up. Halfway through, Jesse and Rashi and a couple others having reached safety, this creature grabbed somebody. Matthew Stewart, I believe. No one watched them die, and no one tried to help him. I confess feeling a bit of relief, thinking the catch will distract it long enough for us to climb. A sinful thought, sure, but I committed much worse. 8 or 9 of us were left, and of all of those, only 2 of us had lights. We shined them upwards, and would you believe that we couldn't even see the roof? I don't know the chances of that. A passage appearing right above us, straight shot to the surface. Praise Jesus, we've been delivered, said Rodney. No one could really argue the point. We climbed, I'm not sure for how long. It was tiring work, but adrenaline's a powerful thing. At first, we braced our backs to one wall and used our legs along the opposite. Then it turned into more like a steep slope that we had to scale with our hands. A few outcroppings gave us chances to rest. Sometimes, the mouth would widen, and we could offer support to the weaker man. Others, it would narrow, and we would have to squeeze through one at a time. And in one of those cases, we lost another man. A wide frame can be a blessing or a curse in a mine, and Leon was just too stout to fit. Even with someone pushing from under and pulling from above, it didn't take long until Leon was wedged so tight, he couldn't even go back down. He would have needed to break his shoulders to move. Ralph offered to do just that, yank his arms out of their sockets, that is. And keep on climbing how? Liam asked. Then, still stuck, the man pulled out a pocket knife and cut his own throat. Rodney screamed, and all I could think was how fortunate I was to be above him rather than below. It did take breaking his arms to dislodge his corpse. He actually didn't mind. Just fell 10 feet before sticking someplace else. There'll be time to pray for his soul later. We kept on for as long as we could, which wasn't long. No, a few minutes later, and we came across the worst thing any of us had ever seen, not counting this creature. The ceiling. One of the lights went out. It can't be, Rodney whispered. We're trapped. The chances of coming out to the surface were always slim, said Ralph, with no emotion in his voice. I just wish we had a few cigarettes to share. What time is it? Most likely dark by now, said Ralph. Then they're gonna send somebody. Where Jesse's confidence came from, I can't say, but I did envy it. Maybe there's already a rescue party digging through the rubble. We'll be home by morning. Is that what you want, Jesse? It was Ralph. All of our friends and fathers getting themselves killed. No, of course not. I just mean, shut up, said Ralph. And he did. No one said much of anything for the next hour. A few sobs, even a couple grim chuckles. I assumed that most of us accepted what was going to happen. A small part of me held out hope for rescue. There was no way to warn the rescuers, even if anyone was coming. Nothing to do at all but wait and make peace with our Creator. Then, the last light went out. I doubt you'll ever experience a darkness like that. Sure, maybe you experienced pitch black. Maybe you've been underground. But I'm talking about the kind of dark that fills your insides, where even a pair of eyes 3 inches from yours don't glow. The kind dark so deep you know you won't ever see light again. The little room we had sat ourselves in somehow started feeling a lot smaller all of a sudden, and the rock scraping my back became harder to ignore. There's no one on this earth that would wish this sort of death upon them. Being buried alive, I would have traded anything just to stretch my arms out. In a way, it was almost like drowning. I nearly drowned once, when I was 12. I was trying to impress this girl by swimming across the lake. It was fun, at first, until it hit me like a baseball bat how much water was between my feet and the lake's floor. I remember clearly how oppressive all that water felt as my head was starting to sink under it. An older girl had saved me. Dying underground was similar, all the stone above and below me for who knows how far. But no 11th grader was coming this time. Of all the things to reach out in mercy, it was the moon, a little stream of blue light above our heads. It took our eyes a bit to adjust and even make the light out. I thought I was hallucinating, until Jesse shrieked in joy. The chimney did go all the way to the surface, but only a tiny slit, not near enough to scurry up. I can do it, Rashi said. The hell you can, snapped Ralph. Rashi placed a hand on his cheek. I can do it. Have faith. Rashi took off his boots and his jacket, spit on his palms and steeled himself. Rashi, I said, I also have faith. I'll be back, he said. And with a whole bunch of people, and guns, said Ralph. Rashi smiled, and guns. Before he left, he stopped for a second. I thought he was second guessing himself. Then he handed me his knife. I thought your religion said you always had to carry this. Rashi just laughed. We couldn't see him climb. He blocked out the light, but we listened for minutes as he wiggled through the impossible small opening. At some point, his grunt stopped, and I had fear he suffocated himself. But then he shouted down to us, I made it. I'll be back soon. There still wasn't much conversation as we waited, but at least it no longer felt like drowning. Thank you, Father. Thank you. I'm done with drinking. I'm done with gambling. I'll never stray from my wife again. Rodney was praying. Speak for yourself, said a guy I can't remember. First thing I'm doing when we get out of this is having a cold beer. Fuck it, make that 3. A few of us laughed, a lot louder than the joke was funny. But that's when I heard it. Shh, I said, and everyone clammed up quick. The air wasn't quiet. We could all hear it. It was Liam's flesh. It was tearing, and then being swallowed. Fuck, said Rodney. We've been delivered. Why is it back? Rashi's coming with guns, said Jesse. He'll make it back fast. It took that thing a while to eat the poor fellas last time. We have time. It had more than one body to eat last time, said Ralph. What if it finishes before Rashi returns? I'm not sure if I thought of it on my own, or if it's what Ralph was trying to imply, but a way to buy us a few precious minutes crossed my mind. I didn't voice the plan though. It was just too damn messed up. Rodney voiced it for me. An offering, he said. That thing down there, it's a devil, a demonic spirit. We don't know that, said Ralph. Rodney continued. It's a demon if there ever was one. Demons are drawn to the wickedness. Someone brought it here, and only an offering will satisfy it. An evil offering for an evil thing. Rod, what are you trying to say? asked Jesse. No one answered for a moment, but the silence was broken by a bone that was cracking, marrow being sucked. This creature was wrapping up his meal. Maybe you're right, Rod, said Ralph. Maybe this devil has wanted a sacrifice all along. Come on, Ralph, you don't believe in that sort of superstition, said Jesse. I'm not sure what I believe anymore, Jesse, but I know that thing is hungry, and I got a pretty strong notion who the most wicked man among us is. He comes from a long line of wicked folks. The next minute or two is a blur, most likely because I try to block it out, but like mostly everything I tried in my life, I didn't do it well enough. Please understand, I don't remember laying a finger on Jesse, cross my heart and swear on my children. The way I remember it, I stood back and was just looking. Even tried to reason with Ralph and the others to leave Jesse be. I've gone over it 1,000 times in my head, maybe 100,000, and I still don't remember myself killing somebody. But maybe the mind is more powerful than the soul, able to change memories that are too horrible to recall. Because one thing I do remember are my knuckles being stained in blood, half mine and half his. I remember looking at that, flat as a washboard face, the punches of a dozen men having removed any evidence of Jesse's high cheekbones and pointy nose. I remember how he looked white as marble in the moonlight. I remember his screams and demanding why, and I remember when those words were replaced by pitiful gargles, much worse than the creature itself. It's that memory which still haunts me. I can forget about it most days, but I remember it every night. Whiskey does help, a little, and that's how you know if the old timer telling you the story was actually there. That's how you can be sure. Before we tossed the body down the hole, we nodded to each other in a silent pact, not to tell anybody about what happened. We weren't even supposed to talk about it with each other. That was the unspoken vow. So if somebody knows about Jesse, they were there. No mistake. I have often wondered if I could have stopped it. I knew it was wrong, and I remember protesting some. I had the dagger, and I knew it didn't care for loud sounds. Could be if I was braver, I could have used the knife and the knowledge to fight the monster off. But if I stood in the way of this mob, they most likely would have killed us both. However you cut it, I was a coward. I'm a coward. Why did Rashi have to leave for help? He wouldn't have let it happen. Rashi was a good man. He made good on his word too. But the guns proved unnecessary. The rescue party never came across the creature, coming straight back to the crag and digging us out. I'm guessing this creature left when it felt so many people around. But the creature was no longer in the mine when the townsfolk went back to recover what little was left of the bodies. Most of the survivors skipped town, moving with barely a goodbye to the friends and relatives they grew up with. One came back, eventually, but the rest I never saw again. With the biggest mine shut down, there was less work. The owner of the mines talked about reopening a time or two. Most of the workers were willing to go on strike if he did. I had switched to another trade by then. I spent the next 20 years in lumber, but that mine is still buried. The way I hear it, kids go up there sometimes to see who's brave enough to hike in and touch the big cursed rock pile. Parents say it's dangerous because it can cave in. Grandparents say it's dangerous too, but for different reasons. It's still out there, somewhere. Maybe it found another cave to call home. Or maybe it's never much like being underground and lives in some forest, in the woods now. Before we came along, I'm guessing it was trapped, and maybe we let it loose into the world. I guess I'll never know. Not sure that I want to. I'll be dead soon, in a box. Maybe Rashi had the right of it. Buried things have a tendency not to stay buried, if it wouldn't cause an uproar at the church. Funny, why should I even care? Stepping inside a building less than 100 times, and those were just for weddings, funerals, and Easter Sundays, there would be a scandal all the same. I never did make trouble alive. I figured no use in starting after I die. Telling you the story, the whole story, is some sort of penance. People should know what's out there in the dark, as much as they should know what we did. On Judgment Day, when I have to look Jesse in the eye and give account for how I lived, the things I done, At least I can say I told it like it happened, not until the end. So if the good judge sees that it's fitting to condemn me, well, I guess I can't protest all too much. Maybe, in whatever hell I'm heading for, I'll meet the creature again.